Hello everyone, Leah Harlann here, checking in, recording this kind of late, but this is my vlog for February. I'll go over how classes have been going, a bunch of the graphic novels I've been reading for a particular class, my new cat, and maybe some other casual talking points. Let's dive in. Today is March 12th, so I'm a little behind on recording this vlog, but February was quite busy for me, especially around the end of the month. I had two major presentations on the horizon, which I just finished last week and the weekend before, and a lot of various things catching up to me that I let get away. Having ADHD means that I need the external pressure of deadlines, but also I will still put things off until that deadline is looming dangerously close. Such is the life. All right, so I believe last month's vlog, I mentioned that I was taking a graphic novels class, and I have really loved it so far. In January, we only had the first meeting. In February, we had a second meeting, and we actually had our third class already this first weekend of March, but I'll save discussing some of that for the March vlog because I did have to give a large presentation in there, but I'll talk about the graphic novels that I read for that class, because I did read them in February for the most part. So if I look back at everything I read for February's classes, the theme, we've had about 2 genre themes per class in terms of what we're required to read. So the February class, we were talking about memoirs, graphic novel memoirs, and also superhero type comics. So that does exclude manga, which I felt was kind of a gap in the curriculum. So I'm actually going to recommend that my professor pick up some shonen manga for that discussion as well, because it felt kind of narrow compared to some of the other genres we've been discussing and the types of visual narratives that get covered in graphic novels. And I feel like shonen manga has some similar theming and tropes and what people look for compared to what people find in superhero comics. So, I mean, I'm going to recommend My Hero Academia, of course, for a Japanese superhero type manga, but I'm also going to maybe recommend some other ones. I'll have to look over my lists and my recommendations before the end of this semester. But the graphic novels that we read for memoirs were, Dark Room, a memoir in black and white by Lila Quintero Weaver. They Called Us Enemy, which is George Takei's memoir, but it was edited by Justin Azinger. And then Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. Isla to Island by Alexis Castellanzo. Miss Marvel, No Normal by G. Willow Wilson. And The Shadow Hero by Jean Lun Yang. There were a couple other ones. We were supposed to, for example, choose our own superhero and memoir graphic novels. Like, we had to pick one out and bring it to class to discuss. Oh, I did. The superhero one I picked was Batman the Killing Joke. Probably, in hindsight, that was not the right choice because this is a class about graphic novels for youth, and Batman the Killing Joke is very much not for youth, as I quickly realized. And then I picked out a memoir, but I didn't end up reading it, so I won't bother discussing it. I still haven't actually read it. Maybe I will, maybe I won't one day. Anyway, so the first class was super interesting. The discussions that I had with my classmates about what we read, what we liked and didn't like, was very engaging. The professor has only mild lecture portions, and this is a very long class. For context, this class is only held on 4 weekends, and It's on a Friday for like 3 hours and then Saturday for like 8 hours, and we get a break for lunch. So he only has like light lectures, and then a lot of this is actually just discussion. And then as part of the class on the first weekend, we were sorted into groups and given topics about visual narratives. And just in case you don't know what I'm referring to when I say that, visual narratives are not just print materials like graphic novels and manga, but we also expand that to be like picture books and TV shows and movies. Really, well, visual narrative, if you take the components, is, something you can see, and then a story. So really any story that is told through a visual medium fits this definition. Although, of course, for the purposes of the class, it being library focused, we focus on print materials like graphic novels and manga. But so we were sorted into groups that were given topics, and we got to choose based on what we were interested in and then sorted accordingly. And then everybody has been giving presentations during the second and third weekends. And then during the last class, which hasn't happened yet, we will get the last couple groups. And I was in a group that went on the third weekend, which is why I'm saving that for the March vlog. But so the superhero and memoirs, honestly, I found the memoirs more engaging and interesting to discuss, because I personally have never really been very interested in reading nonfiction in general, but also especially like memoirs and biographies. I just, we learned about so many historical figures in school, and I just, when I read, I prefer fantasy, science fiction books. And so the idea of reading a nonfiction book just I never found one that caught my eye. But reading in graphic novel form was much more enjoyable and entertaining. And I've actually taken a much more proactive interest in reading memoirs in graphic novel format ever since that class. I've even gone on to read a couple completely of my own volition, not for class. The one that I liked the most probably was They Called Us Enemy. This is George Takei's graphic novel memoir. I believe it was edited and sort of assembled based on a TED Talk he's given, because that was the sort of narrative structure for it. Was George Takei talking about his life and how he grew up with his parents and younger brother in the Japanese internment camps during World War II, and just what that experience was like and how it shaped and affected him as he grew older, because when he was a child, he obviously did not have the full context of the situation and didn't truly understand what was happening to him and his family. And it was only when he got older and talked to his father more, who was a very he was a strong advocate for the Japanese Americans around them at the time and their community, that he was able to understand better and formulate his own experience in words. And so I really enjoyed it. I will say, like, I'm not sure if every school is like this, but my education growing up kind of glossed over everything Americans did during World War II that wasn't blatantly heroic. So they really glossed over the Japanese internment camps. They don't really go into a lot of detail about the circumstances behind and the decision-making process for dropping the bombs on Japan. And I don't want this to get like too political or anything, but I just think that, I had a very specific kind of narrow perspective of World War II taught to me growing up. So to read memoirs like this gives me a much fuller picture, and it does help break down some of that bias that I was raised to have. So I enjoyed things like that and stories like this. My other favorite from the memoir section was Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, and I strongly recommend this graphic novel to any adult who knows someone LGBTQ, who is, if you are LGBTQ, or even if you just want to further understand other aspects of the LGBTQ spectrum that you maybe don't have a good grasp of. This one in particular, being called Genderqueer, is about Maya's experience exploring air identity and gender expression. And there's a little bit of, relationship stuff. There is some graphic content. It's hard to describe safely as someone who is a woman and who is a cis woman. I actually found quite a lot to relate to in terms of like how society expects women to express themselves and the sort of stereotypes and norms that we're expected to conform to. So even though Maya does not identify as a woman, I still found a lot of value in this story, and I did feel seen in certain ways. I will say, like, as a sort of trigger warning, Maya does talk about air visits, multiple, to the gynecologist, and these were very traumatic experiences for M. But I also have never seen such an accurate depiction visually of the experience a lot of women, a lot of people have when visiting the gynecologist. So I will say there's a content/trigger warning for a visual depiction of a procedure that happens and what that felt like visually for Maya. It's quite graphic, in certain ways. But for me, as uncomfortable as it made me feel, I also felt very seen. So I highly recommend. I know I make that sound bad. It's kind of just like the main sticking point that I feel like people should be warned about, because if you're not comfortable seeing imagery like that, then you absolutely shouldn't read that book, that portion at the very least. But on the whole, it was such a beautiful memoir. And like I said, I got a ton of value out of it, even as someone who doesn't share the gender identity confusion and journey that Maya had. And I think it was very valuable for helping me understand other people who are in the LGBTQ community. So overall, loved it. It was definitely a very popular and favorite choice amongst a lot of my classmates as well. There was so much good discussion around genderqueer. And it's such a shame because genderqueer is one of those books that is very highly challenged in library systems in America today. It was, I think, the most challenged or banned book in 2020 or 2021, which is weird because that was months after it had come out. It had come out the year prior to pretty much mostly positive feedback. It won an award for being incredibly relatable to young adults, despite being targeted to an adult audience. And the author, Maya, said that they received mostly great feedback and support from everyone around them. It was only later, once certain groups found out about the book, that they started heavily targeting it for challenges and bans from libraries. So it's a real shame that it's not in a lot of places. And so I do want to talk about it, and I hope more people read it. What else? We did read, the nice thing about this class too is that we will read graphic novels that we don't necessarily think are good material for the library programming. For, these are things that we're never going to advocate. A good librarian does not advocate for censorship of library materials in terms of, thinking that having a book removed from the shelves just because we think it's inappropriate. We would only consider weeding out books and materials that would be considered harmful. Or, of course, things get weeded out all the time just because they don't circulate anymore. So if something disappears from your library, it's not because some librarian just didn't like it and wanted it taken away. Any good librarian worth their degree and their merits does not let personal opinion influence their collection development too much. We are taught throughout school to these sort of skills and critical thinking and mentality that is necessary to curate collections based on what materials and what information we think our community wants and what they need. And this isn't just like vague political stances or anything like that. So we do read materials and novels that we don't think are necessarily good to use or recommend for programming. But I mean, obviously it's like with anything, you just need to acknowledge the flaws and the potential problems before discussing the material or during and after while reading it. So one such example of this was a graphic novel called Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier. And I haven't read anything by her because I believe she writes for mostly middle grade and children's audiences, but she apparently was a fairly well-known author before this book came out. But this book, which is supposed to be about the Day of the Dead and Hispanic identities, a young girl with an illness, cystic fibrosis, actually. So I believe the author had good intentions, but she ultimately took major missteps in how she chose to tell this story and resorted to some pretty poor taste stereotypes for Hispanic and Mexican people and the Day of the Dead holiday. And so ultimately, this book was not well received by the Hispanic community. And the author unfortunately doubled down in interviews for a very, very long time and was defended by her white colleagues. So we had a really productive discussion around that in class. And I agree, I really didn't like a lot of aspects of the story, and most of my classmates felt the same way. I won't go into too much detail beyond that. The superhero unit was kind of interesting. We looked at a really old superhero comic called The Shadow Hero, I mentioned earlier, by Gene Luen Yang. He's really famous for a graphic novel memoir, I think, called American Born Chinese, which I haven't read, but I kind of want to get to it eventually. But The Shadow Hero, I just kind of felt was kind of outdated. A lot of us didn't like it. It was a weird feeling, though, because he is a Chinese American, but the way he depicted certain characters in this comic, which takes place in Chinatown, LA, sort of like shows a lot of these characters taking on certain stereotypes that if another author who is not Chinese had used them, we would have immediately written off as like racist. So it was an interesting debate, but it also just felt kind of outdated for a superhero story, so I didn't enjoy it much. The Miss Marvel one was really interesting. For those of you who don't know, the current iteration of Miss Marvel, this is not Captain Marvel, to be clear. Miss Marvel is a Muslim girl who lives in New Jersey. I think it's New Jersey. And I thought it was interesting and it was cute, but I also just don't read a lot of Western superhero comics. And I think a lot of my classmates felt the same way, that like we just kind of couldn't get into them very much. I'll go ahead and move on. It feels like I have so much I could talk about with my graphic novels class because I do love it so much. There's so much great discussion with my classmates, but they are very long classes and I don't need to give you a total play-by-play. So I'll leave the rest of that for now and talk about the rest of February. February was pretty chill at the beginning of the month, but so that was when I brought my cat home. For those of you who don't follow me on TikTok, I posted some pictures and clips back in January of a cat that I was looking to adopt that a friend of mine who lives hours away, but within reasonable driving distance, had taken in last winter, this past winter, I should say, back in November. But they were looking for a new home for her because the other cats that this family already has weren't really taking to her. So I volunteered, and she had some health problems initially, but I'm happy to report that throughout February, after a couple of vet visits and a couple of treatments, she is doing so much better. I will share some pictures and video, hopefully around this time in the video. Go at it, editor me. I know you've been taking some videos lately for this exact purpose. And I also had a TikTok where I asked for suggestions for a name. And of course I wanted it to be a bookish name. I'm a librarian after all, and a bibliomancer and an avid reader. And after some really great suggestions, except for all the Harry Potter related ones, I decided on the name that was based on a character from one of my favorite book series that I read as a young adult. And that is Cinder, from the book of the same name by Marissa Meyer. It was the first book in the Lunar Chronicles series. And I loved Cinder. I loved her character. And honestly, if you look at the coloring on her fur, it just kind of fits from a non-literary perspective as well. So, of course, Cinder is very popular with all of my family when I sent pictures. I am the only person in my family to adopt a cat. I think my mom had one when she was a kid, but for my whole life growing up, we did not have cats. We were a dog household, and we had a few different dogs throughout my childhood, but never any cats. And even all of my siblings have adopted dogs as adults, but I wanted a cat, and a cat fits my lifestyle better. So I have a cat now, and she has brought so much joy and activity to my life, some frustrations and annoyances. She's no spring chicken. She was a former stray, sort of an ex-feral, as they're sometimes referred to. So the vets guessed that she might even be around 12 years old, which is older than I thought for what would be my first cat, but I just love her so much. So really, for however long I'm going to have her, I'm going to make the most of it. She does have some other health issues that probably will never be cured or go away. She has a heart murmur, and the vet thinks she has feline asthma. There were a couple of respiratory issues that she had when I first took her in, and I think we've handled most of them. But yeah, it's just sometimes it's hard to know for sure unless you undergo very expensive procedures, which we have avoided unless they become absolutely necessary. But so far they have not. Now she's just like walking up next to me. Okay, don't get distracted. Anyway, I've had lots of great cuddle times with her, and she apparently is considered quite friendly. I've had a couple friends over since I got her. I didn't have anyone over for the first couple weeks because I wanted her to get used to the place and her sort of new surroundings, where the litter box and her food and water are. But then I did have a few friends over, and of course she identified the two cat owners in the group and went right up to them, which really surprised one of my friends. She said she had almost never met a cat that willing to socialize or sort of approach new people. And she certainly wasn't like a ball of cuddles for them right off the bat, but she did continue hanging around the area and sort of passively socializing. You know, that thing cats do where they're like, I want to be in the room with all of you, but I don't want to be perceived. So it's, I was surprised that she was that willing to have people around, but she's been really good. So yeah, I hope everybody shows Cinder lots of love. You probably won't see her all that often, but I'll try to include Easter eggs and stuff of her whenever I do footage for things like book hauling and unhauling and yeah, stuff like that. Oh, speaking of unhauling though, I launched a Pangobooks storefront for unhauling books of mine. I saw a TikTok during February that really changed the way I look at my physical bookshelves and collection, which is, I'll link them in the description if you want to check it out yourself. It's not a very informative video from an objective perspective. It's just like one line they mention at the beginning before talking about their own unhauling process and books that they've acquired. But basically the gist is to stop thinking of your bookshelves as like your TBR, you know, like buying books that you totally plan on reading someday, and instead treat your bookshelves as something similar to a wine cellar that you curate and contains not just books you're going to read, but books that you have read and books that you value and share. So every so often you'll need to go through your bookshelves and look at like, okay, what can still stay? What should still stay in the collection? It's like a Marie Kondo, like, does this book still spark joy type of mentality. So I have unhauled some books. There were also just some books that I had random spare copies of, like people gifted me duplicates on accident because they didn't communicate with wish lists and stuff. I have since learned my lesson and do not share the same book lists with with multiple people. Like I'll send it like certain books to certain family members and then not overlap, because I've learned that a lot of them don't talk to each other when deciding what to buy off of my list. So yeah, if you would like, I will link my Pangobooks storefront down below. It's a really nice little website and app for buying and selling used books. It is specifically about used books, so it's really easy to operate from a seller standpoint and from a buyer standpoint. A lot of people have been using it to sell off their like book box odds and ends and trinkets too, which is a little like, I kind of wish they wouldn't, but there's been some cute stuff on there that I've wish listed, so I don't mind it too much. Moving on, the other graphic novels that I read really quickly for the first weekend in March, the themes for that weekend were sci-fi, fantasy, horror, literally all in one, and nonfiction history, like historical events. So the absolute favorite that everyone loved from this weekend's class was Snapdragon by Kat Lee. Definitely my favorite as well. Super amazing. I'm definitely looking to go get my own copy of it, because I've been checking all of these graphic novels out from the library when I read them for class. It's handy to have them just for that particular class, but obviously I don't want to buy all of these different graphic novels just to have for one class discussion, especially if I'm not going to like them. And since I know that we sometimes read books that are specifically like, I didn't like this and this is why, I'm not going to take the chance. But the other amazing thing that happened for that weekend was that The Promised Neverland Volume 1 was on the reading list. And most of my classmates do not read manga, do not watch anime. So, and we're in a Discord server together, like all of my entire cohort is in a Discord server, and there are channels for all the different classes. So when I tell you that in the weeks leading up to this class, it was so hilarious. Every time I checked in and saw someone else had read it, and they were all just like, oh my God, I did not expect that from this book's like art style or like from the setup. And oh, it was so funny, because even though I had never read or watched Promised Neverland, I have been in the anime community long enough that I know what the twist is in the beginning. And if you don't, I'm not going to spoil it. But honestly, even though I have no interest to continue reading or watching it, just that first volume and just seeing everyone else's reaction was chef's kiss. It was so fun, and it was really fun to discuss it in class as well. The historical side, we read Black Heroes of the Wild West. There was a series. There's a graphic novel series for kids. I think it's middle grade. It's called like Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. It's got this, I would say it's kind of like Magic School Bus, but for history lessons. Except I don't think that this author did a particularly good job. Like, I don't think it's as good as Magic School Bus. Although, since it's a series, everyone was kind of just told on the reading list to pick out any one of his titles to read for the class. And other people seemed to like the ones they chose. There was like one on the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman specifically. There was one about the Donner Party, one about Lafayette, one about the Civil War, or no, the American Revolutionary War, I should say. There might be one about the Civil War. I don't remember if anyone read that. There was one about the Cold War, I think, as well, or like spies during the Cold War. The one that I read was all about the Haitian Revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, and the Louisiana Purchase all in one. So it was like a huge undertaking, and all of those things are interconnected, so I can see why he felt necessary to include all of them in one volume. But oh my goodness, I did not enjoy that book. I did not enjoy his depiction of the events. I didn't enjoy, like, I get that it's supposed to be targeted for children, but I felt like there was a very flippant, dismissive tone with the seriousness of some of the events depicted. I mean, it was about the Haitian slave revolts, like about how Haiti gained, like, freedom for all of its slaves when it was still a territory controlled by France, but being fought over by like Spain, England, and the French at the same time. it was very confusing tonally. I probably wouldn't read it to any children. I hear that the series is very popular. Classmates of mine who are librarians say that the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales books are always flying off the shelves. And it sounded like people who enjoyed other titles in his series, maybe those are handled better, but I just really didn't enjoy this specific one, Blades of Freedom. So, and that might have tainted my entire experience with the author and his series, but that's just how it goes sometimes. And then we had to choose a historical nonfiction graphic novel, and then also a sci-fi or horror. We could choose one or the other. And I absolutely was not going to pick horror because I hate horror. I cannot handle horror at all. So I chose a sci-fi, and my choice was Cells at Work, Volume 1 by Akane Shimizu. I really enjoy, I watched like the first episode or two of the anime, but I didn't read it, but I just love the premise. I think all the characters are super cute. I think it's very wholesome, but educational. So like, this is one that I would absolutely read to like children. I think it's targeted at young adults technically, but probably because of how like educational they get with like the scientific names for the various things and functions happening in the body and like the level of detail to which they explain them. But I still thought it was very entertaining and just cute visually. So I enjoyed Cells at Work Volume 1. And then the nonfiction I chose, I was kind of having trouble just finding like a regular historical narrative. So I ended up back in the memoirs, and I read a really great one, Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts by Rebecca Hall. And this was actually recommended by Reads with Rachel, who is a booktuber, and I highly recommend her content. She's incredibly entertaining. She mentioned this book offhand in one of her videos as something that was recommended to her to fill in some gaps in her history education. And so I decided to check it out as well. And it's such a heavy topic, slave revolts, slavery in the early colonial Americas, but it was all told through the lens of Rebecca's experience researching the history of slavery, chattel slavery specifically in the United States, the sort of lost records of all of these slaves who we never learned their names, and they led uprisings fighting for their freedom, and about how in a lot of the spaces between records, we can find evidence of women leading and organizing these revolts. And of course, their participation is downplayed or omitted entirely because back then, no one thought that women would be in that sort of position or had the ability to organize and take up leadership for these kinds of things. They weren't aggressive or willing to fight. I got a lot of value out of reading it, so I do recommend it as well. It is another portion of history that tends to get diminished or glossed over, but I think it's very important. And of course, it was February, it was Black History Month, so it was a good choice. I felt like it was the right time, and it fit the class criteria. And I think that covers everything I read for class. Other classes are fine. I'm taking a professional paths type class that goes into all the different career options that librarians can look at, fields that we maybe don't consider or know about when we first enter the program. But each class session is about educating us on a certain area. Sometimes we've had guest speakers, which has been really interesting. And we are having professional development type assignments. We've gone over resume building, cover letter writing, and how to look for library jobs, where and the criteria and things like that, what they ask for. So it's been a very valuable class. It's the last remaining core required class that I have to take in this program. And I almost wish I'd taken it first, but it's okay. It's not always clear what to prioritize and which of the three, what if there's a specific order to take our 3 required classes in. So I did the other 2 last semester, and this one was fine. It didn't feel too late or anything, just that it feels very much like a welcome to librarian school which was last semester for me. And then the other class, all about gender and sexuality in librarianship, has been incredibly fascinating, very interesting. Another class with just fantastic classmates and fantastic class discussions and a fantastic professor. It is for that class that I have been assigned to read Caste, The Origin of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. This was an Oprah's book club pick in 2020, I think, or at least according to my dust jacket. It was, and it has been another just really incredible read. I know Black History Month is over, but we should be reading Black books and books about Black people and Black history year round, and so I highly recommend that book to everyone. I have been annotating the shit out of it. I'm only like 2/3 of the way through, and I'm almost out of tabs. I have read 2 assigned portions of it. We are like at an assigned reading pace for it, so I didn't finish it yet, but I do have to finish it this month because after spring break, we are going to discuss the book in full, and our final reading reflection will be due. And I honestly can't even begin to expand upon how amazing this book is. Wilkerson's writing style is incredibly easy to digest for breaking down these very high-level concepts, these very difficult to talk about concepts in terms of slavery, its origins, the systems that people have put in place to uphold and continue it even into today. Of all of those books that I was seeing recommended during Black History Month, this one was one of the lighter choices. This one was one of the more like entry-level friendly books. So I highly recommend picking up. Again, it's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. I'm very much looking forward to finishing it. I don't know if I'll discuss it in March's vlog or April's, or maybe I'll dedicate an entirely separate video to it. Okay, I will go ahead and end things there. It's spring break this week, so I'm trying to catch up on a lot of work and record some videos as a backlog, so don't freak out if a lot of these look similar to you. And yeah, until next time, I hope you all read something very fascinating, very interesting, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.